This is the Leadership Podcast, and we study leaders. This is episode 476, featuring Jed Brewer, president and founder of Good Loud Media. Thank you for joining us today. This is Jim Vasilopoulos, founder of Rafty Advisors, and this is the Leadership Podcast.
Hey everybody, Jan Rutherford, founder of Self-Reliant Leadership. Thanks for making us a part of your day as we once again study leaders. And if you want to check out our past episodes, you can find everything you could think of at theleadershippodcast.com. And remember also that this episode, like so many others, is brought to you by Darley. Darley's mission supports all our military and first responders with the equipment they need to ensure mission success, whether that's a drone, emergency medical supplies. Learn more about this great company and its great people supporting our nation's heroes at darley.com. Darley, you serve others, we serve you.
And today we have a very special guest brought to us through a connection from a good friend of mine and a good friend of the show, Angel Torres. He was talking about Jed and his lovely wife, Hallie, for years. You got to meet Jed and Hallie, got to meet them. And, finally got a chance to meet them both at Angel's wedding. Angel and Tina's wedding was fantastic. And instantly it was just like, wow, you are so fascinating, Jed. I'm so honored to have you on the show. Welcome to the show.
Gentlemen, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I told my wife, Hallie, that I was going to be part of the podcast. And she stopped me. She said, "You're hanging out with Jimmy V?" I am. Tell him we love Jimmy V. So I pass along the greetings.
Jimmy V. Never heard that one. Jimmy V.
You haven't heard that one? All right.
No.
So let's let the audience know a little bit about Jed. He's an innovative media executive, nonprofit leader, and civic contributor with decades of experience using music and video to drive social impact. As the founder of Good Loud Media, a nonprofit serving under-resourced communities through media-driven initiatives, Jed impacts lives around the globe. So pretty cool stuff, Jed. Tell us a little something that people can't find about you online.
Well, I grew up playing in rock bands. And so I have played drums and guitar in a million cruddy music venues that were half empty, but I had a blast doing it. And I learned as a kid that music has the power to bring us together, and all the more for folks that either are a part of disenfranchised communities or who feel like they are. One of the interesting things about, playing in punk bands and hardcore bands is not everybody, but plenty of folks who feel drawn to that music feel like maybe they don't belong fully in other communities. And so I learned when I was 14 that music can create a place where people feel welcome when they don't feel welcome in other places.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating kind of observation, understanding of the world around you. But like your journey is really interesting as to how you got here. You're son of a preacher, engineering student, which doesn't seem to fit. Then you end up being a prison chaplain at Cook County Jail for 13 years. Tell us your story. Give people an understanding of like your journey, and then we'll get into later about like how that crafted where you are today.
Sure, absolutely. So I am a preacher's kid, and proudly so. And in the denomination that my dad served, they tend to move clergy around every couple of years. So I grew up in Florida, but we lived all over the state. And when I was the end of junior high, they brought him to the University of Miami to actually be the chaplain for his denomination at the university. And so because he was technically staff at that school, I had all kinds of access to things that a 13-year-old would not normally have access to. So I was kind of interested in computers, and all of a sudden I had access to these world-class computer labs. I had an email address before most people knew email existed. I had access to mainframe computers when I was 13. But also around, a lot of kids get interested in music when they're, 13, 14. Miami has this world-class music program. Actually, a lot of the jazz greats go and study there and then go on. And so I'm 14 and I'm listening to these amazing musicians like, oh, this is great. And so it gave me a really neat place to discover music. They also had a multi-million-dollar recording studio that had been donated by Sony Records. that was right on the campus. And so I was 14 and I was getting to hang out in, top tier recording studios and be a part of recording sessions. All this is happening at the same time that I discover what is referred to as industrial rock music. So these are bands like Nine Inch Nails, KMFDM, Front 242, Nitzer Ebb, and they are this mixture of rock music and electronics. You can't have one without the other if you want to do that style. And so for me, and that's ultimately how I got into studying engineering, was this fusion between what music can be and do and the technology that makes it possible. So when it came time for me to go to college, I could have studied music, could have studied engineering. My parents very understandably said, engineering might be a better idea. For me, it was. So I did that, but I always had just that passion in my heart of like, music is really what I want to do. And an understanding of technology is a way to drive that forward.
I grew up south of Miami taking percussion lessons up at the University of Miami with a grad student up there. I mowed lawns and did all kinds of stuff to afford the lessons. But I remember, how phenomenal it was. And I don't know if you'll remember, Jed, there is a famous trumpeter named Maynard Ferguson.
That name is very familiar. Yes.
Yeah, you've heard his music. Anyway, he could hit that high note like you wouldn't believe. And he would wear like a jumpsuit and like boots in this goofy outfit. And Jim's nodding his head, remembers. Anyway, I saw him at the University of Miami, and you're taking me back a whole bunch of years. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. Fabulous.
Yeah. So in your journey, you're getting this education and you're trying to make it music, and that is a story and a struggle of its own.
Sure, absolutely. So I finished college and I'm playing in bands, and we are stuck. The band I'm in when I finished college, we're stuck in that limbo that's actually pretty common for bands where you've got some fans, you can do some very light touring, you've got, a manager who's kind of sort of working with you. Yeah, if everything breaks right, maybe, you could be something, probably not, maybe you'll ride it out for a while. For me, it was just this, I just want to do music. That's just, whatever it is, that's just what I want to do. And so I have always been a firm believer that networking is just how we all get where we're going. We all do better when we've got the riches of friendship, right? And I was building relationships with a lot of musicians, and I started hanging out with a DJ. What today we would call EDM, but at the time was more house music. And so we did some stuff together and had a really good time. But his day job was that he was a prison chaplain. And so at a certain point, I kind of owed him some favors. And he invited me. He's like, well, why don't you, come with me? I'm running a program. You can play guitar. I need some help with it. And A, I was like, I'm intrigued. And B, I do owe you some favors. So it would be rude to say no. So, gentlemen, I'll tell you this. Most of the best things in my life have come to me as a huge surprise. I go to a place, I try a thing, I'm like, I had no idea. And getting involved in prison outreach is one of those things for me where I went and I did that. This is amazing. So I got involved first as a volunteer. And at the same time, this is actually, we're going to almost change courses for a second. These paths will reconverge in just a couple of minutes, but it's kind of how I wound up where I am today. I needed a job. And so through the engineering school, one of my professors was involved in a startup. They needed engineers. Sure. Whatever. He told me it's vaguely connected to music. I said, sure, fine. Sounds great. Here's what they were trying to do. This is back when people still had portable CD players. They wanted to put a wireless receiver in a portable CD player that would get ads over the air. It would pause the CD, play the ad, restart the CD. And the goal was to have either free or very low cost CD players for people. Because at the time, like a good Discman was $100 back in the late 90s. I mean, these were actually pretty expensive devices. And so, maybe ad supported music could be a thing. They needed engineers. I needed a job. Sure, we can do that. They get a grant from the National Institutes of Health who says, we think this technology could be useful for public health communication. We're going to give you this grant money. We want you to build this out. But we want you to focus it on young people with chronic illnesses. Well, the company says, we need money. This sounds interesting. Let's do it. Then they discover, well, to actually do this program that we're now being funded for, we need someone to produce all these radio style PSA spots that, young people will hear. Well, I'm the only one in this small company that knows anything about recording anything. And so, in the spirit of the military, I am voluntold that I have a new job now. My new job is I am the chief executive officer for all things messaging. I will do that. So, for a couple of years, I produced hundreds of advertising spots pertaining to juvenile asthma. We worked with Cook County Hospital with some folks there focused on young people in Chicago with chronic asthma. And so I did hundreds of these. I had a great time doing it. But the thing that really mattered is this was a formal medical study. And at the end of it, the kids in our experimental group got better. And for me, that was this light bulb moment. The kids got better. Here we had numerical proof that if you took music and you took a message, if you combine them in an artful way, you could measurably improve people's lives. We had kids listening to music and listening to the messages that we sent, and they got better. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with this knowledge, but this is amazing. And because the universe has a sense of humor, the company goes out of business a few months later. And I go, what now? Okay, so this is going to bring us back to the prison outreach stuff, because this whole time I've been involved in that as a volunteer. And so I'm at this weird crossroads where the band, you'll be shocked to hear, did not go anywhere. We had a lot of fun. We made a lot of music, but we were not signed to Atlantic Records. The company, I just had a mind-blowing experience. Things are possible I didn't realize were possible. There is no more company. I don't have a job. Meanwhile, I've been volunteering with this. I don't know what to do. Well, the folks I've been volunteering with, they come to me and they say, hey, we know the kind of messaging work that you have been doing for young people with asthma. I said, yeah, you should come do that here. I said, well, that with asthma? Like, no. Same kind of messaging work, but for people coming out of prison, for people experiencing homelessness, for folks who are in long-term addiction recovery. That kind of messaging, we feel confident would be a benefit to folks that are facing other difficulties in their lives. You should come do that here. And in the spirit of things, good things coming as a surprise, I had never imagined myself doing something like that, but that sounds kind of like running away and joining the circus. I'm in, let's do it. So for about 13 years, I worked for this organization and my time was split. About half of it, I was in the jail. I was, on the streets. I was working directly with people going through a rough time. And about half of it was creating targeted media for those same folks in recording studios, at film studios, working with radio stations, but crafting media that would impact people's lives in a deep way for people who were going through very significant challenges in their lives.
I just want to say something to the audience. Some of the audience might be saying, well, what's this have to do with leadership? And remember, when we talk about leadership, we're talking about influencing human behavior. We're talking about getting results done through other people, doing good. My question is, again, for the business-minded people listening, you're talking about at-risk people.
Yeah.
For business people, that doesn't sound like a really great market.
Sure.
Sure. That, where you're going to, make money. So, what was your thought there? I mean, again, there's a need, of course, and again, the sweet spot is, what can I do that the competitors can't, that somebody will pay me for?
Yeah.
So how did you reconcile this sweet spot?
Jan, I love that question. You're seeing exactly where I'm going. As a preview of coming attractions, let me describe an extant business case that desperately needs someone to step in and solve it. My current organization is a part of solving it, but we shouldn't be the only ones. There are all kinds of life-saving medical interventions and medications and pharmaceutical products that are proven, they're on the market, they are amazing, but there are populations not using them. I'll give you an example. The drugs that we have today that are designed to either treat or prevent HIV are something close to a miracle. They are absolutely amazing. And when they are used, the companies that make them are paid for them. The question is, how often are they really used? Well, it turns out the answer varies pretty significantly across demographics. Some demographics, word has gotten out. And those products are used religiously, as they should be. They are very, very common. There are other demographics where they are used very little. Word has not gotten out. People are not aware that this is something they could do. People are not aware that this pharmaceutical product would help their life. And so, from a pure business case standpoint, when you think of the companies that make these medications, that make these pharmaceutical interventions, they are, in essence, they're leaving money on the table because these are potential customers that could be using these products. Even if those customers aren't directly paying, someone would be paying on their behalf for these products to be distributed. But if they're not being used, they're not being paid for. It turns out that we have a lot more help on offer, at least in the United States, than people are actually taking advantage of. So there's a huge business case for underutilized development work that has already taken place, but word hasn't gotten out to all of the customer segments that could take advantage of it.
Mm. Again, I'm tracking it, and again, I have a pharmaceutical background, and you just discussed the holy grail, which is compliance.
Yeah.
You know, if you improve compliance, your revenue goes through the roof. That
Yep.
most people aren't compliant. But I'm curious about, a little bit going back. Your dad was a preacher.
Yeah.
You have this affinity for at-risk people. I mean, is that where that came from?
I think so. I mean, I think for me, so the organization that I lead today, we are not a faith-based organization, and that is by design. We work in a lot of different parts of the world. We work with folks from all kinds of faith traditions and backgrounds. But on a personal level, I am a person of faith. And for me, the living out of that faith has to do with love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that one of the main things that we can do if we want to love our neighbor is to find ways to reduce human suffering. There are so many matters of faith where reasonable people can reasonably disagree. But I think that all of us can agree that whenever possible, lessening the amount of suffering in the world and lessening the amount of suffering that our neighbors and that our loved ones face is the morally right thing for us to pursue. And so for me, that has been a North Star principle for a very long time.
Yeah.
I'm really kind of fascinated in many ways by everything you're saying, but there's, you have this knack for bringing in like top people to work together on solving these problems. So you're working with renowned psychologists and scientists. You're working with Grammy winners to kind of craft these messages. Tell us a little bit about how this works, how you bring people together of such high caliber to solve these problems and address them and like how it actually works. I know you said you got results with asthma in Chicago, but like, how does it actually work? Give us a little bit more detail there.
Sure. I'll give you another Chicago area case study that is much, much more recent. That is through my current organization, Good Loud Media. So for our listeners joining us, I'm going to briefly describe a pharmaceutical product because the details of it really matter for the story I'm about to unfold. So our listeners may be aware that there is what is right now properly referred to as the opioid epidemic. There have been, and this is a real tragedy, there have been so many people who have lost their lives from overdosing on opioid-based painkillers and other form of opioid narcotics. It turns out there is a drug, a pharmaceutical product. The brand name is Narcan. The generic name is naloxone. It's the same thing. That is commonly today, it's used as basically a nasal spray. So if you have allergies and you ever use a nasal spray for that, it works very much the same way. That will, to quote folks with lived experience, it will knock the dope out of you. If someone is having an opioid-based overdose, in the vast majority of cases, the immediate application of Narcan will reverse the course of that overdose, and it will save their lives. It is very safe. There are very few side effects. You won't feel great, right afterwards, but there are very few side effects. It's a wonder drug. I mean, it's really impressive stuff, but there's a few things about it. The first is it has to be administered essentially immediately. There's a very short window to use this because when someone overdoses, certainly in most cases, and I am not a medical professional, so those who are listening, if I get a detail wrong, I'll beg your pardon. But in most cases, if someone overdoses, they stop breathing and your body can't exist in that state without damage for very long. So you got a couple of minutes, which generally means Narcan needs to be with you. If it's at home, it doesn't really help anybody if you're out on the street. You need it in your purse, you need it in your car, you need it on your person. But the second is people need to feel equipped to use it. If we can bring those things together, then we start to get the compliance that Jan spoke to just a moment ago. Because Narcan is not cheap. The companies that make it, they've got, as they should, a healthy profit margin on it. But we need people to have it. We need people to use it. Well, Chicago has been extremely hard hit by the opioid epidemic. And there's actually a ton of data from the Illinois Department of Public Health that kind of chronicles where is this happening. There's plenty of it in rural areas of Illinois, but there's actually plenty of it, especially in kind of near West Side neighborhoods in Chicago. You think of places like the Austin neighborhood, Garfield Park, Lawndale. They actually break down that data by more demographics. And one of the things that's interesting is, at least as of a couple of years ago, the hardest hit folks for opioid-based deaths in Chicago were not kids and not young people. They were more in the 45, 55, 65 age range. Those were the folks at the highest risk.
Wow.
And so I started meeting, I was introduced, this is something I've been interested in doing something about for a while. I was introduced to a state representative who's been very involved with this, who actually formed a task force, the West Side Heroin and Opioid Overdose Task Force, to do something about this problem. And so I started meeting with physicians, and I started meeting with social workers and with community outreach specialists, and asking, what's the holdup? What's the problem? Because maybe there's something music can do there, maybe there's not, but let me understand the size and shape of the problem. One of the things at that time, this goes back about 3 years now, but one of the things at that time that came up was a concern of not everybody, but of some folks in the neighborhood, where people think of Narcan as something that drug users would have, that, that's for drug people. I don't use drugs. I don't want people thinking that I use drugs. So I'm not really interested in that. I get that. That concern makes sense. I understand it. There are some missing pieces, but I understand it. What we have here is a misperception. We have a false narrative that has taken hold that this product is for a certain kind of person. Well, I believe, and I have from experience seen, that music can be great at correcting misperceptions and at challenging false narratives. It can help to define new narratives if we do it right. And so I really strongly believe in deep collaboration. I've got a few things that I'm pretty good at, but I'm not an expert at everything. I'm barely an expert at much. So I want to go back to the people that I'm working with and say, if we could craft a song that changed that narrative, would that help? And they said, yeah, if you can do that, that would really, really help. So I said, can we work together? Can we create kind of an iterative process where we see if we can craft some music that would change this narrative? And they said, yeah, let's try and do it. So at that point, because I've been involved in music a long time, I've got a pretty broad Rolodex. And so I'm able to reach out to people. The first thing I start saying is, well, we're trying to reach people who live in this neighborhood. They're in the 55, kind of age range. They're going to be interested maybe in kind of a throwback hip hop kind of sound. That's probably like when you look at the way that radio does programming, they have kind of buckets that they put people in. I've got a lot of background in radio. And so the bucket here would be what's referred to as throwback hip hop. So I kind of look at producers that I know who have, skill with that. And I reach out and I say, here's what I'm looking to do. Here's the need. People are dying. I think if we can do the right music, I think we can make an impact. Here's the kind of sound that I need. Can we work together? And gentlemen, in my life, I have discovered few things produce as much genuine magic as simply asking. To go back to the faith tradition in which I was raised, there's a famous phrase, you have not because you ask not. I have learned to ask pretty boldly for things, and most of the time people say yes. And so what we did then is a mirror of what many of my projects look like, which is an iterative back and forth process between some really talented creatives, people who have won Grammys, people who have won, Academy of Country Music Awards, people who've, done the big stuff, and then subject matter experts and people with lived experience. So in this case, we've got physicians that are treating drug overdoses. We've got social workers that are helping people in addiction recovery. We've got people who have dealt with addiction in their own lives in a long-term sense. And I'm taking demos back and forth between these crowds and asking, does this work? Does this do anything? And it helps to have a thick skin, because you will have people say, no, that is not good. We should not do that one. Say, well, that's a thumbs down. How about this one? That's okay. I mean, it's all right. How about this one? Yes. And that's the thing that I'm looking for. I'm looking for the moment where my subject matter experts and my folks with lived experience and my creative crew are all like, yeah, no, that's good. That
What is
works.
this
That tells the
song?
story.
How does this song get into that audience in that neighborhood? I mean, is it the radio? Is it like, how does that work? Because I get that you bring these people together, you make a song that addresses
Yeah,
that. Like, I can't say I've ever heard a song with Narcan in it, but like,
sure.
how does that make it to have an impact? That last mile, I would say.
I love this question. It's perfect. It's perfect. So there is a little bit project by project, but in this case, we put it everywhere. So yes, we are going on the radio. We're working with the throwback station here in Chicago. We are blasting it all weekend long. You're going to hear this song every hour. It's going to be paired with a, hey, if you want Narcan, here's where you can get it. And if you go, it's free. You can go there right now. Go get it. It's going to be on the radio. We're going to do it on social media. We are going to blast it. We are going to reach thousands and thousands of people targeted in these neighborhoods, in these demographics, in these age ranges to make sure it goes to the right people. And with social media, we can look at analytics. We know who we're reaching. We know who we're getting through to. And then we're also doing, in this case, an in-person thing where our community outreach partners, they are in the community. They're setting up a table. They are handing out health kits. They're handing out Narcan. They've got music blaring. They are sharing it with people. So we're doing radio, we're doing online, we're doing in person so that we know we're taking it that last mile and getting it into people's eardrums, into their brains. And the part that is the most important, it's the thing that we celebrate the most, is when people amplify it to their own network. People say, my cousin needs to hear this, my family needs to hear this, my friend needs to hear this. Because at this point, they are now the ambassador for what's being said. It's no longer a thing, Jed's neat idea or this producer's neat idea. It is one person to the next, family to family, friend to friend. And when we see that happen, that's when we know we've really knocked it out of the park.
That's pretty cool. We've been talking a lot about impact in Chicago. And speaking of Chicago, there's this wonderful company in Chicago called Darley. They're a family-run business, and they support all our first responders. And, those first responders are very familiar with Narcan and what they need to do to help save people's lives. And I think this is consistent with their mission. If you want to learn more about Darley, they're wonderful people. They support our first responders and the military around the globe. You can learn more about them at darley.com. That's DARLEY.com.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. It's funny. Narcan has been around for at least 40 years. I didn't have a chance to look it up, but I can tell you it's been around a long time. Only in injection form at the beginning, but yeah, it's really something. Hey, Jed, shifting gears real quick.
Yep.
Nigeria.
Yes.
You've taken a more international focus. The critic would say, "Hey, we got enough problems here. What are you doing looking over?" I mean, what caused your lens to go abroad?
Man, I appreciate that question. Well, a few things. I basically say there's really two factors operating in parallel. The first is in my prior role, previous organization, I was responsible for producing a small mountain of media. There were seasons where I needed to, kind of release the equivalent of a full album of music every single month, and then kind of short films on top of that. And so when you do that, you need help. That's not a one-man job. And all nonprofits everywhere are trying to stretch that dollar as far as they possibly can. And so I started building relationships with kind of creatives in other parts of the world. There is a thriving music scene in Nigeria. It actually informs music through most of Africa. There are amazing musicians in Sri Lanka and in India and in all over the world. But I started building these relationships in part because I need to produce a lot of media. I need people who are good at it, but I also need people where I'm able to be a good financial steward with the resources of a nonprofit. And so I started building relationships on that basis. And as musicians hang out, we talk. It's never just business with musicians. And as I got to know my friends in Nigeria, as I got to know my friends in Sri Lanka, as I got to know my friends in other places and learned about their country and their culture and their traditions and their situation, I realized not only are there difficulties that they're facing, but they're difficulties that music as a messaging vehicle is actually really well equipped to do something about. So I was intrigued on that level. Good Loud Media is a relatively recent organization. I've been doing this kind of work about 20 years, but Good Loud Media is about 4.5 years old at this point. And, one of the questions that people ask, and rightly so, is how do you decide on your projects? How do there's a world of good you could do, but how do you decide? And I think, to borrow a phrase from the Salvation Army, I think one of the things that we've started looking at is where could we do the most good? Where could our work yield the deepest impact? And one of the things that as an organization we have felt increasingly drawn to is music as a tool for preventing mass violence. There are really two kinds of mass violence in the world. There's the kind of mass shootings that unfortunately do occur in the United States. We are working on some projects related to that. Stay tuned. But the other kind is mass violence that occurs in the context of civil wars and of genocides. And that doesn't generally occur in the US. That's typically other places in the world. And so we are working on building relationships and building platforms where music can be used as a part of a tool for preventing and lessening the possibility of mass violence. When you look at the countries that we are at work in, those are countries that have an elevated statistical risk of those kinds of bad outcomes. And so that is part of how and why we have been drawn to operating in those places.
Yeah. And is there a success story related to all this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that is critical if you want to help prevent violence, and conversations about this in the US have become, very, very politically fraught. It's a difficult situation, but something that does get brought up that needs to be acknowledged is obviously mental health does matter. Obviously, whatever else may be true, we want to make sure that folks that need mental health care, and especially folks that want mental health care, have access to it. Certainly, that is a part of how we lead to a more peaceful society. It turns out that in other parts of the world, the lack of available mental health care is pretty profound. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, in many places, not in all, but in many places, there's a significant scarcity of mental health care. There's just not that many practitioners. And so we began working about 2 years ago with a team of Nigerian caregivers, folks who are some of the top therapists in the country, top psychologists in the country, asking, could we extend mental health care by embedding a certain amount of knowledge transfer in music? In other words, if you were to go to a therapist and say, I'm dealing with anxiety, I'm dealing with depression, one of the things, depending, that they might want to talk to you about is, here are some exercises that you can do. Here are some practical tools that can help in your life. Well, can we embed those in musical form? Can we make that something where we can transmit that information effectively through music? And as we talked with our Nigerian care team, their answer was, yeah, we think we can do that. And so we together kind of created some music that is designed for people who are facing anxiety, where breathing exercises might be part of how you could treat that in an effective way, and embedded those in a musical context. Today, that media has gone out to top nightclubs all over the country of Nigeria. There are video clips overwhelming on my computer of people dancing to this music where they are learning about how to use breathing exercises to deal with anxiety. But we also have direct therapists in the country using it in private practice, using it with clients, using it with people who are facing acute mental health symptoms, and it is working. They're reporting back, this is meeting a need in a culturally informed way. This is helping people make progress. It's helping to knowledge both be acceptable, but also stick with them, which is really the goal. That effective messaging would be appealing and would be really sticky.
Yeah. And again, I know he wants to jump in real quick, Jed. Part of what we talk about with leadership is, are you intentional about how you want to make people feel?
Yeah.
And again, some people make music because they like it, and some people, like you, are intentional about how you want people to feel. And I think, to me, that's sort of the leadership lesson is, are there lots of ways to do that? I mean, I always thought the most interesting thing when it comes to music and music theory is when they kind of break down why Amazing Grace is why it does what it does to you. And,
Yeah.
you know, one of the guests we had on the show, Eric Waller, who was a painter, when he would do these cool paintings in front of an audience and do it upside down and turn it up, and you'd see Einstein or MLK or Kobe Bryant, he'd have certain music, Lennon's Imagine or something to make people feel something. And I don't know, it just makes me think that the leaders listening maybe should think about, what are all the ways besides music, that they can make people feel something. Because we know, Gallup survey again is reminding us in the world, 79% of people are disengaged at work.
Yep.
So I don't know if that pushes a button with you or not.
It absolutely does. I think here's what I think is unique about music, but I think there is a lesson for leaders and managers and C-suite executives. When you give a speech, however long that speech is, if people are hanging with you, you're telling them what to think. Whether it's 2 minutes or 20 minutes, you are telling them what to think. Maybe they agree with you, maybe they don't, but that's kind of what you're doing. With music, you're telling them what to think and how to feel at the same time. Music is a guided meditation that has both a cognitive and an emotive aspect happening in parallel. And I think one of the key things, and this is really what makes the work that I do possible, is people don't have their guards up about music. If you're listening to a speech, it's pretty common, a lot of arms folded, a lot of, well, we'll see. People don't generally feel that way about music. If it's a style of music that they like, people are prepared to hear you out. And if I like where you're going, yeah, man, I'll hang in there with you. And so I think with leaders, I think one of the things that I would encourage is, what are the places where you can construct an environment where, even if it's just for 2 minutes, I mean, a lot of songs are 2.5 minutes long, where people are willing to be unguarded with you. Can you craft an environment where people are willing to be unguarded and just hear you out and imagine something new? At the end of the 2 minutes, they may say, forget that. I'm never going to listen to that again. But I think if people are willing to give you a fair hearing in an unguarded way, I think that can be the beginning of really transformative leadership.
Yeah. I love the commentary on intentionality. And I think even, getting down to the point where you say, hey, we got 2.5 minutes, there's a level of precision in your messaging that has to be there too. And so I think there's an element of understanding the music that your demographic is going to respond to, is a level of understanding of your audience. And so I think there's, it seems like there's a lot here about really targeting and pinpointing your messaging. I think the last time we spoke, you said something like super interesting to me. You said, in mass violence, there's a death of empathy, and you get to the point where you demonize your enemies. And I just thought, okay, yeah, that death of empathy. You've done some work with some experts in empathy.
Yeah.
Help, and I think empathy is something we need to be mindful of in the workplace. As we have workers that are remote and we don't see people, and we become so transactional in our lives. Help us understand what we can do to recognize when empathy is dying and how to increase it. And you may even have an example of like something where you've done to increase empathy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I was talking with a university professor recently on exactly this topic. And, how do we teach empathy? How do we transmit empathy? And one of the things at the top of that list is the idea of perspective taking, creating a space where you try to consciously both think through and imagine, what would it be like to be this other person? What would it be like to, as we're recording this conversation right now, there are folks walking their dog and they're going along. What would it be like for me to be out walking my dog right now? I don't have any problem thinking about that, because that's not a loaded thing to think about. I have a dog and I like walking it. But what would it be like for you to be a person that you really disagree with? What would it be like for you to be a person that's on the far opposite side of a really, really loaded issue? Because I think the challenge is, they're a human being too. No matter how much you may disagree with them, and you may be right, and you may have reasons, and your reasons may be correct, they're still a human being. And I think part of the reason why we are so scared of empathy right now is we're afraid that if we saw our enemies as other human beings, we might find ourselves agreeing with them even a little bit, and we do not want that to happen. But if we want to move forward, the only way forward is to see our enemies as human beings. And that really is what empathy is, but that's perspective taking. And if you look at, to go back to faith traditions, if you look at the golden rule, treat others as you would be treated. If you look at the traditional Jewish expression of a very similar idea, what is hateful to you, do not do to another. There are similar expressions in a lot of faith traditions. They're built on perspective taking. They are built on the idea of, imagine you're somebody else. Would you want that? No, then don't do that. I think empathy in many ways, begins and ends with perspective taking. And so in terms of an example, something that we're working on per mass violence, per empathy, this is also in Western Africa. There are areas where there are civil wars that are raging. There are areas where there are various forms of religious extremism that result in violent action. There are areas where there's just banditry, but there's violence. And so one of the things that we're working on is perspective taking in song. I want you to imagine that you were a part of this other group. I want you to imagine that you had a different life. What would that mean for you? We are distributing that music in a way where it is very likely to wind up in the eardrums of people who are potential perpetrators of violence. That's kind of the point of it. But the tool, the psychological tool that's being used there is perspective taking. It is, imagine that you are a different person. Imagine that you are not the guy with the gun, that you are the guy on the other side of the gun. Think about what would that be like for you. And the beauty of music is it begins as something physiological, even before it's something that you think about, even before it's something that you feel. When music hits your ear, if it's a good sound, there's part of us like, go on, tell me more. The advantage of working with people who've won all the Grammys and sold all the platinum records is they know how to make it sound right. And so whether it's someone on the west side of Chicago, whether it's someone in Western Africa, whether it's a young person in the Middle East, if we do our jobs well, it hits their ear, they're intrigued, then the feeling hits their heart, and like, no, I like that feeling. And then the thought hits their brain and they're willing to think about it.
Recently I was speaking with my nephew, who's probably same place in life you are, Jed. And I said something about networking, and he goes, "You've been telling me that since I was a little kid, that, you need to network and that's your insurance and blah, blah, blah." And, Jim tells me that, that's a superpower of yours, is networking. And we've had a number of people on the show that were pretty extraordinary networkers. And, a lot of the listeners are all out there. They're busting their butt. They're on the hamster wheel. They don't have time, to network and go have a coffee twice a week. What would you say to the people that, know it's important, but don't like to do it at least in the way they think they're supposed to do it, or people that aren't making the time to do it? What advice would you have for those folks?
I would say the following phrase is a cliche, but I think it's really, really true. Your network is your net worth. The people that that is your riches in life. And I don't mean that in a transactional way. I just mean for any of us, the community in which we live, and I mean community in a very, very broad sense, that's everything. If you look back in time, right, when the earth actually was a much more violent place, the strength of your community was literally your personal security.
Yeah.
Right. If you live in a fortified place and there's a lot of folks who, they know how to fight and whatnot, you're probably safe. If you don't, you may not be. But I think that even today, the strength of your network is the bedrock of any success in your life. Here's what I would argue. This is just a personal opinion, but it has been true in my life, is I don't think anybody succeeds alone. I love the US. I am proud to be an American, but I think we have a few national myths that hurt us. And one of them is the idea that people succeed in isolation. I don't think that's true. I think that success is always team success. And so the question is, who's on your team? Your life, your endeavors, your pursuits, I think could be easier and they could be more fruitful with the right team. I don't ever succeed on my own. everything that I do is always the result of a team effort. And so I think my advice to folks that don't want to do the networking because they don't have time is this is not a thing like brushing your teeth that you do so the dentist won't yell at you twice a year when you go in for your cleaning and you say, yeah, I should have done what you told me to do. This is how you build that success that you are seeking. You're slaving, you're grinding. This is what makes all that slave and grind actually translate into something.
Yeah. I and again, I asked you to kind of address, maybe the younger folks that are listening that, need to really, have a network so that if anything happens, again, dig your well before you're thirsty. But let me bounce this up against you, and maybe there's no answer, but maybe there's just a comment. What's really interesting in the last couple weeks, a lot of my clients that are older, have reflected on the fact that that they're a lot choosier about who they associate with. In other words, they have less friends than when they were young, way less friends.
Okay.
I wonder how that bumps up against, networking, because in some ways, as you get older, you know who you want to associate with, and you're like, okay, I don't need to have this meeting with this person, kind of, I just wonder if there's a comment from either of you on that.
Well, I defer to Jim. Jim, what do you got?
The old guy.
Thank you, Jed. Actually, I don't know. I mean, I still love talking to people. I love inviting new people into my world. Like I was in a meeting earlier in the week and like, yeah, I was invited, but I really didn't belong. But they're like, okay, why are you here, Jim? You don't really do this. And I'm like, I'm interested. Like, I think the topic is fascinating. I want to learn something. And, I just, I don't know. I don't ascribe to that. I am still, maybe I'm just young at heart, but I'm still in that phase where like, I'm just collecting as many interesting people as I can find. There's some people maybe I don't connect with as frequently because, maybe it is transactional or maybe it is like, I think I've maybe gotten all the juice I can get out of that, orange, but, I don't know. I don't know if that part of me is going to die.
Yeah. Well, I think, you and I talk all the time, Jim, about, advising people to stay curious. And again, I think there's always something fascinating that makes people tick and, how we're all so similar and so different. Jed, I'm wondering, based on my military experience, in military intelligence and different things, you know, um, you know, throughout the world, these connections all have value.
Sure.
Various things. I mean, knowing things and this knowledge and the ability to use it is really valuable. I'm wondering if if you've thought about ways that are of this that are powerful beyond money.
Can you tell me more about that, Jim?
Well, I mean, you see patterns, you see connections, you see openings, you see opportunities in all these endeavors. I'm just wondering if there's parts of you that think, boy, this could do a lot of things. I mean, there's power here with all these connections. You're an engineer. I mean, it's like
Sure.
you're making all these connections of energy,
Yeah.
to produce something. I mean, I'm just wondering if there's you've been approached by folks that say, hey, you could do this. Hey, you could do that. Or you've got your own ideas of ways that you could leverage this for even more significant systemic change rather than,
No,
at a sort of a tactical level.
man, I really appreciate that question, and I really appreciate the very kind words that are they're embedded in both the observation and the inquiry. Um, what I would say is kind of yes to all of the above, right? I think that, and this actually goes. This is a leadership themed podcast, and so I think this goes to leadership, which is there's always that question of where do you want your impact to be? Do you want your impact to be direct boots on the ground? Do you want your impact to be, the person behind the person? Do you want to be, yet another level up from that? And I think actually that Good Loud Media is in kind of a growth phase right now where my role is shifting, where, I have historically been, I'm the person on the ground kind of doing everything, but increasingly, I am setting other people up to be the people that are doing things. To that point, we are actually working on going from a nonprofit to a multinational nonprofit. We're working on establishing a formal NGO in Nigeria right now. And as that happens, I will, by necessity, be more separate from what is happening on the ground. And so I think, Jan, per your question of, seeing the possibilities, I think it's both what is possible, but also what is necessary for me as a leader for us to get there. And I think that the thing for me is trying to figure out, who do I need to be in this next season in order to take a hold of those new possibilities? What are the skills that I either need to acquire or sharpen? What are the things that I really enjoy doing, but that I need to probably do either less of or none of in the season, because that needs to be somebody else's job. And in embracing that it's all impermanence, and that's okay. I think actually is a part of leadership and of growing organizations.
Yeah.
I really appreciate, there's a word choice in there that I think is really intentional, specific, precise, and important. And it's the word season. And I think that is something that we should all kind of think about and consider as we go through life. Is there are different seasons in life, and there are different phases, and we pass in and out of them. And it's a transition, and it's obviously you're exceptionally intelligent, very wise. And, recognizing that is just such an important thing that I think a lot of times coaches like Jan and I are trying to help people see that, you're changing seasons right now, and let's work through that transition. So as always, Jed, super enlightening, fun conversation, really unique perspective on the world, and leave our listeners with some closing thoughts here as we wrap things up today.
I would really offer one closing thought, which is, you have a vision in your head of something that you can do to make the world a better place. I know you do. I don't think I've ever met a leader who didn't have some kind of idea of, I think this would help somebody in some way. Do it. Now is the time. Not next week, not next year. Do it. Get started. It won't get easier. The best time to do it is right now. I absolutely promise you. There's always a reason not to do it. The world needs you. If you're listening to this podcast right now, you are a leader in some form, in some community. We need you. Get to work. This is your moment. The sign you've been waiting for, this is that sign. Get started with your thing that's going to make the world a better place.
I think that's the best call to action ever.
I agree.
Yeah. 100% a good one. Good on you, Jed. Good on you.
Thank you. Guys, this has been such a treat and such a privilege. Thank you both for having me.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And Jim's looking at me because it's my turn to give the quotable quote. And of course, we'll include ways for you to connect with Jed in our show notes. So make sure you visit theleadershippodcast.com. And remember, and this is a quote from Jim, of course. And this is great because it's 5 words. Where words fail, music speaks. Hans Christian Andersen.
It's a wrap.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Podcast. To listen to more shows or to access the books and content discussed on this show, be sure to visit theleadershippodcast.com. The material in this podcast is copyright by Rafti Advisors and Self-Reliant Leadership and must have written approval before commercial application.